When the shadow no longer dominates your energy, one of the clearest signs is this: you no longer see the world as the enemy. You stop blaming your suffering on others, and instead you begin to perceive the root of your pain within yourself. This does not mean you become passive, nor does it mean that injustice ceases to matter. It means you start to recognize how your inner conflicts shape the lens through which you see life. For a long time, the things you condemned most strongly in others were likely aspects of yourself that you had not yet dared to face. And so you projected them outward like arrows, accusing others of what you feared lived within you. You may recall times when someone's success filled you with quiet resentment. You may have seen someone's freedom and called it recklessness, or their confidence and called it arrogance. But if you had looked closer, you might have found that your judgment was not born of clear insight, but of inner discomfort. You were reacting not to who they were, but to what they stirred in you. That stirring was the shadow, a part of yourself that had been buried, repressed, and denied. The shadow, when it is in control, manipulates your perceptions. It filters your reality through pain, shame, and unmet needs. When someone offends you, you react not just to their words or actions, but to the wound they unknowingly touched. And as long as you remain unaware of this, you remain in bondage. You become a puppet of your own unconscious, pulled this way and that by invisible strings you believe are external. The world becomes a battlefield, and you are at war with its inhabitants, unaware that the conflict began, and continues, within. But something changes when you begin the journey inward. There is a turning point where you stop asking, "What did they do to me?" and begin to ask, "What in me was hurt by this?" This is not weakness. It is not victim blaming. It is the beginning of power. For as long as you assign your emotional states to the behavior of others, you are at their mercy. But when you take responsibility for the source of your reactions, you reclaim authority over your inner world. You start to recognize your projections. You see that the person you judged for being controlling reminded you of the part of you that feared losing control. You understand that the one you call selfish may have threatened your deep need to be needed. And when you realize this, something remarkable happens. You no longer feel compelled to attack. You no longer feel the burning need to accuse, to shame, or to defend. You are able to witness your reaction without becoming it. This is not detachment in the cold sense of the word. It is clarity. You feel deeply, but you are not consumed. You remain present, but you are no longer possessed. The emotional charge begins to dissolve, and with it, the false image of the world as hostile or against you. You realize that others are not the enemy. They are messengers, mirrors, symbols. They are opportunities for you to see what still hides in the dark corners of your psyche. At this stage, relationships take on a new texture. You stop entering them to confirm your wounds. You are no longer seeking betrayal to justify your distrust, nor abandonment to confirm your belief in your unworthiness. You are no longer searching for rejection to echo the shame you have buried. Instead, you begin to encounter others as they are, not as projections, not as phantoms, but as living souls, distinct from your inner world. And with this comes a quiet, revolutionary kind of peace. You notice when you're triggered, but you no longer rush to blame. You pause. You ask, "What is this reaction trying to show me about myself?" And in this pause, in this space between stimulus and response, freedom is born. That space is where transformation lives. The more you practice this, the more your vision clears. You begin to see not only the pain you carried, but also the beauty that was long hidden beneath it, the strength, the creativity, the love that had been eclipsed by fear and denial. The shadow does not vanish, and that is not the goal. The goal is integration. The goal is to bring what was unconscious into consciousness, what was hidden into view, so that it may no longer control you from the dark. And when that happens, you move through the world differently. Your judgments soften, your reactions become reflections, your relationships deepen. You no longer project your inner battles onto others, because you are fighting them within, with courage and with awareness. So, when you realize that the people around you no longer bear the burden of your inner conflicts, when you can hold your emotions without accusing someone of causing them, when your first instinct is to look inward rather than outward, that is when you know the shadow no longer dominates your energy. And that is when you finally begin to see the world as it is, not as your wounds once painted it. When the shadow no longer rules your energy, something subtle yet profound begins to unfold. You discover you can sit with discomfort without needing to flee from it. This is no small shift. Most of our lives we are taught, implicitly or explicitly, to avoid, suppress, or anesthetize any feeling that unsettles us. We call it coping. We call it strength. But in truth, it is often a quiet form of self-abandonment, a reflexive flight from the parts of ourselves that hurt, that tremble, that feel too much. The shadow feeds on this avoidance. As long as you cannot face what is painful, the shadow governs your behavior from behind the scenes. The escape takes many forms. Some seek it through addiction, substances, screens, compulsive patterns that numb the ache. Others retreat into control, perfectionism, overthinking, strategies designed to keep life predictable and emotion at bay. And then there are those who hide behind anger, sarcasm, or denial, not realizing these are simply shields forged in childhood, armor against feelings once too large to bear. But in all these efforts, what is lost is intimacy with the self. The soul becomes a stranger, and without even realizing it, we live on the surface of our own being, disconnected from the very experiences that could free us. Discomfort is not the enemy, it is the gateway. The emotions we flee from, grief, fear, shame, uncertainty, do not come to destroy us, they come to teach us. But they speak a language we've forgotten how to hear because we were conditioned to silence it. We were told not to cry, not to be afraid, not to show weakness, so we internalized the message. Uncomfortable feelings are dangerous and must be suppressed or bypassed. But the turning point comes when you stop running. When you find yourself in the middle of pain, not reaching for distraction, not blaming someone else, not retreating into your head, but simply staying with what is. You begin to breathe into it, feel its texture, its rhythm, and you realize something unexpected. The discomfort does not annihilate you. It moves. It changes. It reveals. To sit with discomfort is to step out of the compulsions that once ruled you. It is to no longer be the puppet of the unconscious, jerked into reaction at the slightest emotional disturbance. This sitting is not passive. It is the deepest act of courage. It requires a willingness to face what arises without collapsing into it or turning away from it. And in this sacred act of staying, the shadow loses its grip. For the shadow depends on your refusal to feel. It thrives on your denial, your fear of the dark. But when you bring the light of awareness into that darkness, when you meet it without judgment, it begins to transform. In this way, discomfort becomes a doorway into authenticity. You begin to realize that your sadness is not a flaw, your fear is not a weakness, your confusion is not a failure. These are signals from the depths of your psyche, asking not to be fixed or solved, but simply acknowledged. As you learn to stay with them, you gain access to the wisdom they carry. A sadness that you sit with long enough will reveal its origin. A fear that you do not flee from will show you what you love most. Even shame, when held with gentleness, begins to dissolve into compassion. You stop needing to chase happiness because you are no longer afraid of its absence. You begin to trust that life flows in seasons, that joy and sorrow, clarity and confusion, connection and solitude all have their place in the great rhythm. And so you become less reactive, more grounded. When a difficult moment arises, your first instinct is no longer to escape, but to observe, to ask, what is this trying to show me, rather than, how do I get rid of this? And in doing so, you shift from survival to presence. This presence is what allows for true healing, not the superficial kind that comes from affirmation or distraction, but the kind that grows slowly from within, like roots deepening into the earth. You become more than just someone who has suffered. You become someone who understands their suffering, who holds it without being defined by it. And in that holding, you soften, you forgive, you begin to make room for others in the same way you've made room for yourself. And so the shadow, once a tyrant in your unconscious, begins to evolve. It becomes a guide. It no longer pulls you into reaction because it no longer needs to. You've made space for it. You've learned its language. You stop demanding that life always feel good, and in doing so, you've discovered a goodness deeper than pleasure, the goodness of wholeness, of truth. When you no longer fear discomfort, you are no longer ruled by it. And in that freedom, something ancient and eternal begins to rise within you. Your true self, unguarded, unafraid, awake. There comes a moment in your inner journey when you realize that you no longer fear knowing who you really are. This is not a moment of sudden triumph, but one of quiet clarity. The shadow, once a terrifying force in the depths of your psyche, begins to lose its power, not because you have defeated it, but because you have turned to face it. You have stopped running from yourself. You no longer avert your eyes from the parts of your personality that once made you flinch. And this is one of the clearest signs that the shadow no longer dominates your energy. Your willingness to see yourself fully, to acknowledge what has long been hidden, without shame and without denial. For most people, the idea of truly knowing themselves is frightening. Not the image they show the world, not the version sculpted for approval, but the raw, unfiltered self, the one who harbors envy, resentment, insecurity, desire, rage, the one who sometimes lies, the one who needs more than they admit. That self is not easy to look at, because for years, perhaps even a lifetime, the ego has been trained to keep it out of view. Why? Because you were taught that being lovable meant being good, that being worthy meant being clean, perfect, noble, strong. So you buried the rest. You pushed it down. You tried to become only light. But what you resist in yourself does not disappear. It only grows stronger in the dark. The traits you condemn become the traits you unconsciously act out. The feelings you suppress become the forces that control your life. The shadow is not evil. It is simply unloved. And the longer you refuse to know yourself as you truly are, the more the shadow will express itself through distortion, through sabotage, projection, and emotional chaos. The transformation begins the moment you stop pretending. You sit with your truths, even the ones that disturb you. You notice your jealousy, not to judge it, but to understand it. You witness your neediness without calling it weakness. You feel your anger without labeling it as failure. And you begin to see that these parts of you are not enemies to be conquered. They are signals. They are fragments of your humanity asking to be seen. They are parts of you that were abandoned when you were taught that only certain traits deserved love. At first, this self-awareness may be painful. You may grieve. You may feel a deep sorrow as you recognize how long you've lived in exile from yourself. But that sorrow is sacred. It is the beginning of reunion. For once you stop fearing what lives inside you, you begin to return home to your own soul. You begin to realize that your so-called flaws were never moral failings, but wounds or protections or unexpressed needs. The rage you disowned may have been your early response to betrayal. The arrogance you tried to hide may have been your defense against a life where no one truly saw you. The shame you carried might have originated in places where love was conditional, where you learn to associate worth with performance. As you examine these things, not with blame, but with compassion, something shifts. Your identity is no longer held together by repression. You are no longer performing an ideal, you are simply being. And there is great peace in that. There is freedom in no longer fearing your own reflection. In this state, the shadow has no more secrets to wield against you. Its arsenal is emptied, not by force, but by awareness. This awareness makes you gentler, not only with yourself, but with others. You see them not as threats or puzzles to decode, but as fellow travelers carrying their own hidden sorrows. You stop needing to prove your goodness because you are no longer trying to hide your humanness. You understand that to be whole is to contain opposites, to be both strong and vulnerable, both kind and capable of anger, both wise and foolish at times, and you no longer judge yourself for the tension between these opposites. You embrace it. You live it. There is no longer an urgency to be perfect. Perfection, you come to see, was always an illusion born of fear. What you seek now is authenticity, and that can only arise from truth. You trust yourself more, not because you have purified every impulse, but because you have made peace with all that lives within you. You are no longer a stranger to your own inner life. When the shadow loses its hold, your self-concept expands. You are not confined to one role or identity. You are not frozen in one narrative. You are evolving, fluid, alive, and this aliveness brings with it a sense of rootedness, a grounded presence that cannot be shaken by every passing doubt or external judgment. You have touched something eternal in yourself, and you know now that it does not require polishing to be worthy of love. This is how you know that the shadow no longer dominates your energy. When the question, "Who am I really?" no longer frightens you, but invites you into deeper intimacy with life. There is a quiet, yet unmistakable turning point in the psyche, one that signals that your energy is no longer ruled by the shadow, and it reveals itself in the most unexpected way. Your life is no longer being propelled by your wounds. The familiar sense of urgency, the restless compulsion to prove something, to chase validation, to rewrite an old story through every new experience, begins to dissolve. Where once you were driven by unconscious pain, now you are guided by something else entirely. Purpose, direction, meaning. Not the kind of meaning that comes from achievement or approval, but the kind that wells up from deep within, born not of fear, but of integration. For most of us in the early stages of life, our motivations are not as conscious as we believe. We think we are pursuing goals freely, when in truth, we are often reenacting old patterns, seeking closure in places that cannot give it. The child who never felt seen grows into the adult who craves recognition in every room. The one who was taught to associate love with performance becomes the overachiever, addicted to applause, terrified of rest. The one who was wounded by betrayal becomes hypervigilant, seeking control, mistaking fear for wisdom. These dynamics are not chosen. They are inherited from the past, etched into the unconscious. And the shadow uses them to steer the wheel of your life without you ever realizing it. You begin to wake up when you notice the pattern, when you realize that your pursuits have not brought peace, only repetition. When no amount of praise can silence the inner doubt, when no relationship, no matter how promising, can soothe the ache that lives in the soul. At first, this realization is destabilizing. You may feel lost. You may question everything you thought you wanted. But in that questioning lies the beginning of liberation. You begin to see that what you called ambition was often compensation. That your dreams, while admirable, may have been stitched together by your pain rather than your joy. And then something subtle changes. You stop asking, "How do I get what I want?" and start asking, "What is asking to move through me?" You stop constructing your identity as a reaction to the past and start allowing your being to unfold in the present. Your actions no longer emerge from a need to fix something broken, but from a desire to express something whole. You're no longer trying to become someone, you're learning how to be who you already are beneath the conditioning. This is not passivity. On the contrary, it is the beginning of true power. Because when your energy is no longer hijacked by the need to defend old wounds, it becomes available for creative, authentic movement. You are no longer tethered to proving your worth, and so your choices become clearer, your steps more deliberate. You begin to make decisions that align with your soul, not with your fear. You are no longer trying to escape pain, you are moving toward meaning. You begin to notice when the old temptations arise, the impulse to argue just to win, the need to explain yourself to those who misunderstand you, the desire to shine just to be seen. But now, instead of acting on them automatically, you pause. You ask, what is motivating this? Is it truth or is it habit? And this pause changes everything. It opens space for intention. It allows something deeper to enter the room. In this space, you are no longer so easily manipulated by your environment. The opinions of others, which once had the power to destabilize you, now pass through you with less weight. Criticism is still felt, but it does not shatter you. Praise is still pleasant, but it does not define you. Because you are no longer feeding your sense of self through the eyes of others. You are not acting out of a deficit. You are no longer trying to be healed through external success. Instead, you carry your sense of direction from within. You are led by the quiet voice that asks not, what will make me impressive, but what feels true to the life that is trying to live itself through me. The life that emerges from this place may look simpler on the outside, but it is infinitely richer on the inside. Your actions begin to harmonize with your inner world. Your work becomes an extension of your soul, not an escape from your pain. Your relationships are no longer selected to soothe your abandonment wounds, but to share your presence. You stop measuring your worth by metrics you never truly believed in. You live slower, but with more depth. You choose carefully, but with more certainty. And when difficulty arises, as it always will, you are not pulled backward into your old patterns of reaction. You meet challenge with presence, not panic. You navigate loss without losing yourself. You face uncertainty without needing to control every outcome. Because your actions are no longer attempts to repair the past, they are expressions of who you are becoming now. And that is how you know your shadow no longer dominates your energy. When your life is no longer a reaction to your wounds, but a response to your soul. Another unmistakable sign that the shadow no longer dominates your energy is found not in how you see yourself, but in how you begin to experience others. You no longer automatically project your own denied feelings, fears, and judgments onto those around you. Instead, you start to see people more clearly, as they are. Not as distorted mirrors of your own unconscious material. This shift may seem subtle on the surface, but it marks a radical transformation in the way your psyche relates to the world. Projection is one of the shadow's favorite tools. As long as parts of yourself remain disowned or rejected, they will not stay quiet. They seek expression, and often they find it by being cast outward, onto your spouse, your friend, your colleague, your enemy. You find yourself annoyed by someone's arrogance, yet never question your own hidden superiority. You bristle at someone's emotional neediness, while refusing to see your own fear of vulnerability, where you accuse others of manipulation or control, without recognizing the ways in which you may subtly seek to control your environment through detachment, withdrawal, or passive resistance. In this way, the world becomes a screen onto which the shadow plays its dramas, disguising itself in others so that you never have to confront it within. When you are still under the dominion of the shadow, this projection feels justified. It feels like clarity. You are convinced that the other person is the problem, that their flaws are glaring and obvious, and you are merely reacting to what is objectively true. But once you begin the journey of inner integration, something begins to shift. You start catching yourself in the act. You hear the tone of condemnation in your voice, and instead of continuing outward, you turn inward. You ask, what in me is being stirred right now? What have I not yet accepted within myself that this person has come to reflect? This question, asked sincerely, changes everything. It introduces a kind of sacred responsibility. You begin to realize that every strong emotional reaction is an invitation to know yourself more deeply. Not every conflict is a projection, of course, but the ones that trigger disproportionate intensity often are. And instead of indulging those reactions or becoming entangled in blame, you become curious. You step back, you reflect, and in that moment of reflection, the grip of the shadow begins to loosen. As you withdraw your projections, you make contact with the very parts of yourself that had been buried. This is not easy. Sometimes what you uncover is pride, envy, rage, or sorrow that dates back decades. But the discomfort of seeing these things is the price of freedom. Because what once ruled you unconsciously can no longer do so once it is brought into the light of awareness. You begin to reclaim your energy. You are no longer fragmented, no longer scattered across the faces of those you love and hate. You come home to yourself. And something beautiful happens. Your relationships change. You stop demanding that others carry the weight of your unresolved pain. You no longer expect them to be perfect, nor do you need them to embody your own denied darkness so that you can avoid it. You become more forgiving, not because you condone harmful behavior, but because you understand it. You recognize that everyone is fighting a battle with their own inner world, just as you have. And so, instead of judging, you listen. Instead of reacting, you respond. Instead of blaming, you inquire. This clarity of perception is a profound gift. It frees you from entanglement. You no longer need to fix others or control them. You let them be who they are, while you remain centered in who you are. Boundaries become easier to hold, not out of fear or defense, but out of clarity and care. You speak truthfully, not harshly. You love genuinely, not conditionally. You no longer enter relationships seeking healing. They become places where healing naturally happens, because both souls are bringing their wholeness, not their brokenness, to the table. And most importantly, you begin to see yourself with the same clarity you offer to others. You no longer require perfection to feel worthy. You no longer need others to validate what you already know within. Your self-perception becomes less clouded by projection and more rooted in truth. You are aware of your strengths and your flaws, and both are held in equal measure. There is nothing left to hide, nothing left to prove, and this inner transparency becomes the foundation of peace. This is not a state of spiritual detachment or moral superiority. On the contrary, it is an experience of profound humility. You recognize how easily you too could fall into error given different conditions. You see your humanity mirrored in others, not as something to be ashamed of, but as something to be honored. The lines between me and them soften, not in the sense of merging, but in the recognition that beneath the differences there is a shared longing for love, for belonging, for truth. That is how you know the shadow no longer dominates your energy. When you stop projecting your unhealed wounds onto the world and begin meeting others, not as symbols of your own inner divisions, but as companions on the path of wholeness. There is a moment in the process of inner transformation when you look back at your life and realize that the person you once were no longer governs the way you move through the world. The reactive, wounded, defensive self, the one that had to hide, protect, perform, or fight, is still a part of your story, but it is no longer the one writing the chapters. You are no longer pulled backward into old identities, and you no longer mistake survival patterns for your true self. This is perhaps the clearest sign that the shadow no longer dominates your energy. Your past no longer dictates your present. To live unconsciously is to be governed by what has already happened. It is to walk through life with a script written by pain, loss, fear, and unmet needs. You respond to situations not with presence, but with memory. You speak not from who you are now, but from the voice of the child who was once silenced, shamed, or ignored. And the tragedy is that while your circumstances may have changed, your nervous system still reacts as if nothing ever healed. You brace for abandonment in relationships where love is available. You expect betrayal in places where trust is trying to grow. You sabotage joy because you've come to equate it with eventual loss. And though it may feel like you're just protecting yourself, what you're really doing is reliving the same cycle over and over again. This is not weakness, it is simply the cost of an unexamined inner world. When the shadow dominates, it uses the past as a lens through which everything is filtered. And because the past was filled with experiences that overwhelmed the psyche, the mind believes it must remain on guard. It confuses awareness with control and safety with distance. So you stay defended, even when no one is attacking. You stay hidden, even when you're being invited to be seen. And you stay stuck, even when the path forward is wide open. The turning point is subtle. It happens quietly, sometimes even without your full awareness. You begin to respond differently. A moment that would have once triggered you into withdrawal, attack, or self-sabotage now finds you grounded, curious, calm. You no longer need to be right. You no longer need to explain your worth. You no longer enter a room needing to perform or disappear. Instead, you bring your presence, and that presence is born of a simple truth. You are no longer fused with who you had to become to survive. The past is not erased, it is not forgotten, but it is integrated. You remember what happened, but you are not possessed by it. You can talk about your pain without reliving it. You can acknowledge your wounds without organizing your life around them. You can feel grief without drowning in it. Feel anger without being consumed by it. And in this space of integration, your energy shifts. What once spiraled into chaos now settles into coherence. What once was fragmented now begins to align. This alignment is not about perfection. It is about congruence. Your thoughts, emotions, and actions begin to support one another rather than fight for dominance. You say what you mean, and you mean what you say. You choose your boundaries with clarity, not from fear, but from self-respect. You walk away when it is time, not out of avoidance, but from knowing what no longer serves you. You pursue what calls you, not out of desperation to fill a void, but out of reverence for your own becoming. You no longer need to revisit old pain to feel alive. You no longer seek conflict to feel powerful. You no longer define yourself by how much you've endured. Instead, you begin to see your life as something new, something sacred, not a battlefield, but a canvas. You become the artist of your own experience. And the strokes are no longer dictated by unconscious patterns. They are chosen with intention, shaped by who you are now, not who you used to be. And when you find yourself slipping into the old ways, as you inevitably will, you do not spiral into shame. You notice, you pause, you reflect, you return. Because now you know that slipping is not the same as being lost. You trust yourself to come back. You trust the process of your own unfolding. You understand that healing is not about erasing the past. It is about reclaiming your power to choose something different in the present. That is the true mark of freedom. Not that the past never speaks, but that it no longer shouts over your future. You walk forward with your head held high, not because you have forgotten what broke you, but because you have made a home for all of it. The pain, the joy, the failure, the grace. It is all part of the same story. And the shadow, once feared, once denied, now rests beside you, not as your master, but as a companion who helped you remember your light. That is how you know the shadow no longer dominates your energy, when the past no longer commands who you are becoming. If this message has stirred something in you, if you recognize the patterns, the projections, the wounds you've carried, and you feel the quiet pull toward liberation, then now is the time to act. Don't just listen and reflect. Begin the work. Sit with your discomfort instead of fleeing it. Question your reactions instead of defending them. Watch how your energy moves and ask yourself who is truly behind the will, your conscious self or your unexamined past. This is your invitation to turn inward with courage and clarity, to stop waiting for healing to happen by accident and instead commit to the path of intentional integration. Because the life you are seeking, the peace, the purpose, the wholeness, it does not begin out there. It begins the moment you stop running from your shadow and begin walking alongside it. Start today. Thank you.